In 2013, the BBC were filming my groundbreaking cat tracking project in the village of Shamley Green in Surrey, England. When out of the blue, one of the camera crews that had been working on the project asked me to attend a covert meeting away from the village. And what they told me at that meeting was the BBC had been scheming behind my back and were planning to take all my work and claim it as their own. This is my story. It's a story of betrayal, deceit and dishonesty, and how the BBC hijacked my cat tracking project and present it to the public as their own scientific study. In the summer of 2012, I started tracking a handful of cats in the village of Shamley Green, and I picked this village for two reasons. Firstly, it was just 5 minutes away from my office, and secondly, over the previous 6 months, 2 cats had gone missing in the village and we'd failed to recover either of the 2 cats. So this tracking project was all about getting a much better understanding of the behaviour of cats when they left their homes and how they interacted with each other. And I had been running my project for approximately 6 months and I realised we simply weren't getting enough data. So we had to scale the project up and include a lot more cats. So with the help of a local magazine called the Guildford magazine, we released a feature about my work, and in that feature was a specific request to the cat owners of Shamley Green asking if they'd like to volunteer their cats for the project. And the response was overwhelming. We had approximately 20 cat owners come forward and volunteer the services of their cats. But there was one particular phone call that really caught our attention. It came from a researcher working for the BBC who said that they'd become aware of our cat tracking project and would love to find out more about what we were doing. A few weeks later, I met with 2 directors from the BBC Horizon documentary series who asked a lot of questions about my project, and I even told the name of the project, which was The Secret Life of Cats. And at the end of the lunch, the directors made their pitch. They said they'd love to come on board and film the work for an episode of the Horizon documentary series. Approximately 8 weeks later, the BBC came to the village of Shamley Green and they set up their centre of operations in the village hall, which they called Cat HQ. And the filming commenced, and I worked with a number of different film crews, came out with me on a couple of my investigations and tracked me around the village when I was working on my project. Then a few weeks before the filming was due to be completed, one of the camera crews contacted me to attend this covert meeting off-site. They informed me that they'd recently been told by the directors of the documentary to cancel all filming of my work. And when they pointed out to the directors that the starting sequences and the closing sequences were yet to be filmed, the director said it really doesn't matter because he's not going to be included in the documentary. I came away from that meeting feeling totally betrayed by the BBC. They'd made so many promises to me. They knew it was my project. I'd given them the name of the project. And everything started to make sense because ever since the BBC had arrived in the village, they'd been pestering me for ages to get access to my historic tracking data and all the footage from my field cameras. So I now had to come up with a plan that would both preserve the integrity of my project, enable me to continue my project after the BBC left the village, but at the same time protect the camera crew that had given me this important information. And I found the answer to the problem in the way that I secured my data. When I first started my cat tracking project, I was using data tracking devices. And I attached these devices to the cat's collars, and after a couple of days, I'd remove the device and download the data. I would then analyse the data and position my field cameras in the locations that the cats were going to on a regular basis in order to film how each cat interacted with the other. But when the BBC joined my project, they elected not to use these data tracking devices. However, they continued to use the footage from my field cameras because it was only me that knew where they were located around the village. So the plan I devised was introduce twice as many field cameras. I'd continue to give the BBC the footage from the existing cameras, but all the new cameras, I retained that footage for myself. I became like a double agent, so to speak. And the second part of my plan was to increase the number of visits I was making to Cat HQ. And once I felt that I had sufficient data and sufficient footage to achieve the objective of my cat tracking project, I thought it's time to confront the BBC. I prepared for the interview, and when I was ready, I strolled into the village hall and asked the assistant director if I could have a chat. Initially, he lied. When I told him I was concerned that the BBC were yet to film the opening sequence and closing sequence of my project, he claimed that they'd had to cut back on the number of camera crews and that they would eventually get round to recording the footage. Then I told him that I'd heard rumours that the BBC were planning not to use me in the documentary. He denied this was the case, saying the people working on the project should not be gossiping outside of the main hall. Once I let him dig his hole, then I just confronted him. I told him exactly what I believed the BBC were up to, and I reminded him that the BBC were filming my project, and I politely and very firmly asked him to pack up with a few colourful adjectives and to leave my project. Now, my demand the BBC leave my project must have caused quite a stir, because a few hours later, the assistant director phoned me up and asked me if I would please meet a senior executive from the BBC who was travelling down from London just to meet me, and she wanted to take me to lunch. The meeting took place in the Red Lion public house in the centre of the village, and it was a total waste of time. The executive started by saying that Horizon was a scientific-based series, and the Pet Detectives was simply not the right fit for Horizon, and therefore a decision had been made not to include any of my footage within the documentary. And by way of compromise, the executive added that they had so much footage that the BBC were considering making a little diary programme that would go out after Horizon was broadcast, and there was a possibility that I might be included in that diary. But she could give no guarantees that that would happen. It was a case of like it or lump it. I walked away from the meeting totally gutted. I couldn't believe just how deceitful the BBC had been. They didn't suddenly remember at the end of the filming that Horizon was a scientific-based series. They'd known right from the very start that I'd not be included in their documentary, which left me thinking, how on earth would the BBC explain why the tracking project was filmed in Shamley Green? A few months later, after the BBC stopped filming in the village, this arrived in the post. It's a DVD of the Horizon documentary titled The Secret Life of the Cat, and I've already told you where they got the title from. But this is proof of the BBC's dishonesty. It's proof of how they manipulate footage in order to give the viewer a false impression of what has taken place. The presenter opens the documentary by saying that this is a BBC experiment, and the first sequence shows two professors travelling in the same car. One of the professors is poring over a map looking for the village of Shamley Green, and the viewer's given the impression that this is the professor's project, and that is reinforced by they say they're going to the village to recruit cats for their project. And at one point, the second professor makes a wisecrack in the car, saying that the cats of the village might sneak into the local butchers and steal the sausages. There is no butchers in Shamley Green, and the only offence that took place against a butcher was the hijacking of my project by the BBC, and with the help of these two professors, they portrayed my project as being their own. And to me, that is totally unacceptable. My experience of working with the BBC reminds me of an ancient apple tree that used to stand in the middle of a field near my home, constantly producing bitter fruit that hardly anybody wanted to eat.